really ask if you want to take the kids downstairs or leave them up here or what. So I don't know if anybody talked about it. I guess they're going to make you listen to me again. So, all right. Have you noticed that people are constantly looking for signs? Constantly looking for signs about anything and everything going on. I mean, for millennia, people have been looking to the stars, and we know that as astrology and horoscopes, and they also look for signs in numbers. That's known as numerology. And there are those who consult mediums, wanting to know the future, wanting signs to help them understand. But there's something I do want you to understand about that, and that is, if you would, those are all satanic and forbidden by God. All right? So if you know someone who is constantly going out and checking their horoscope and things like that, that stuff is satanic. God has forbidden that. And we need to encourage them to not be doing that, especially if they are believers. They need to understand that that is something that goes against what God has directed us. But they try to find evidence of supernatural signs even in the changes of the earth. Okay? I don't know if you've noticed, there's been a lot of earthquakes lately. All right? And people are looking for signs in that. People are looking for signs in all the storms and the change of the weather and things like that as well. And they scrutinize world events. And this idea of always looking for signs is nothing new. People are constantly hungering for signs, even to verify things that are going on right in front of them. At the time, the Jews were asking Jesus for heavenly signs just to validate what he was saying and what he was doing. As a matter of fact, if you would, in Matthew chapter 12, verse 38, says, "Then some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law said to him, 'Teacher, we want to see a sign from you.'" But notice what Jesus told them in the next verse, verse 39. He answered, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." Okay, now granted, that's not an end times sign type thing that they were asking for. They just wanted validation of what Jesus was doing. But something Jesus said there connects right on through even end times signs that people are looking for. You see, Jesus indicated that the only sign that they would receive would be his resurrection. It's the only one that he said that they would receive. Which was kind of funny that they were asking for signs, because in reality, what was he doing the entire time he was ministering? He was giving them signs by the miracles he was doing. You almost get the idea that they're saying, "We want you to give us a sign." And he probably goes like, "Huh? Have you really missed this? Like, what else have I got to do? I have been healing the sick, casting out demons, feeding the multitudes, raising the dead, and you're wanting signs?" But that gives us an idea of why Jesus said that there wouldn't be a sign given specifically for anybody. Because of the fact that even when he does give signs, people were missing it. And the reality is that usually what happens is people are looking for signs to validate themselves and not him. And so it is interesting that when we start to get into the main passage that we're going to look at, that we find in the sign category, there's going to be a big gap. But as we pick up, Jesus told his disciples one day that the temple in Jerusalem would be leveled. Okay, they asked for a sign as to when it would happen. And we find that in what is known as the popular end times passage, Matthew 24. Picking up at verse 3, if you would. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. "Do you see all these things?" he asked. "Truly, I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, "when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" But notice, not only did they ask when the things would happen concerning the temple, they asked a second question. And it was there, if you would, "And what will the sign of your coming what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" So a lot of people look at this entire passage as being totally end times when in reality they've asked two questions. The first question was, when is the temple going to be destroyed? When are all these buildings going to be leveled that you're talking about? And the second one is, when are you going to return? What's going to be the sign of your coming? And Mark chapter 13 and Luke 21 also contains portions of this conversation and the things that took place. But have you noticed, as we talk about this idea of signs, how people often try to fit things in the Bible, especially to fit end times events? Have you noticed that? I've been aware of that over the years, that how every time something major comes along, oh, the end is near, the end is near. You know? And they start looking at all of these crazy things going on. One of the most recent ones was the blood moon and the red heifer that's never been put to yoke. And I'm thinking, well, which blood moon are you talking about? And I know a whole lot of red heifers that have never been put to yoke. Okay? Year after year after year after year. You know? And so they try to fit things into the Bible. Because for some reason, people want to know the future. But as we get into this, we're going to be looking at there's a problem with this idea of knowing the future. And I think there are reasons why God has approached things the way He has. But even now, people are trying to fit this pandemic into the Bible as a judgment from God or even a sign that the end of the world is imminent. I mean, I've seen post after post after post. God's judgment, the end is near, the end is near. Well, let's take a quick look at Jesus' discussion, consider the context of it with other passages, and see what we learn about looking for signs. Now, make note how often Jesus says you. Matthew 24, let's pick up at verse 5. Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name claiming, 'I am the Messiah,' and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death. And you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." Notice, if you really consider and listen to what people are saying today, they are trying to fit everything going on today into these verses. Rumors of wars, earthquakes. They're trying to make it fit in this passage. The problem is, this passage is an introduction of what Jesus is about to tell his disciples, and it focuses primarily on what's going to happen in their lifetime. Did you notice how many times he said you? You will be handed over. You're going to see. These things that he's talking about mostly in that part of that passage are focused on what's going to happen in their lifetime. And notice he talks about false Christs and the rumors of wars as well. As he says in verse 9, then, if you would, you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. So he's set up the flow of things. You're going to hear of war and rumors of wars and wars. You're going to hear of earthquakes. There's going to be false prophets, false Christs. Then you will be handed over. He's talking about things that they were going to experience in their lifetime. This isn't end times passages here. Many of those things in Matthew 24, even in the verses yet to come, were going to happen, and they were going to see them to happen. Let's look at the next few verses, though, to better understand what he's preparing them for. As we pick up in verse 15. So, when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. For there will be great distress unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. And at that time, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, there he is, out in the wilderness, do not go out. Or here he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. So what's he talking about? What's he preparing them for? Well, during the approximate 40 years after Jesus' resurrection, there was constant and substantial upheaval in the Roman Empire. And during this time, close to the end of that 40-year period, the Roman procurator desecrated the temple, which caused the Jews to revolt. And in response to the revolt, the Roman general Titus, who would later become emperor, marched on Jerusalem. And the early Christians recognized this as a fulfillment of what Jesus had said, and they fled to the mountains to Pella, which is about 17 miles south of the Sea of Galilee before Titus arrived. And during the siege of Jerusalem, it was divided into 3 sections, and each section controlled by a different faction. So what you have is you've got the Romans on the outside putting the city under siege, so you've got that going on. And then inside the city, you've also got war going on amongst the 3 different factions. And remember Jesus saying, if you would, for then there will be great distress unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. And that's exactly what was going on. If you study your history and you go back and you look at everything that was taking place there, if you would, by the time Jerusalem fell to Titus, those trapped inside the walls around Jerusalem were even eating their own children to stay alive. The stench of death was everywhere as bodies were piled in the streets because they couldn't take them outside the city to bury them. You talk about horrendous conditions. I mean, we talk a lot about the conditions of Holocaust and things like that, and they were horrible. But when you study what was taking place in Jerusalem at the time Titus put Jerusalem under siege, it was worse than even the Holocaust. It was horrible. Now understand how this ties to Jesus' return and what he has to say. See, Jesus said in his opening discourse that this was just the beginning of birth pains. And now he says, we'll pick up in chapter 24, verse 29, if you would, immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Then will appear the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Notice, nothing about the events from then until he returns. There's nothing there. He skips from the fall of Jerusalem to when he returns. No signs, nothing given. So what's he trying to tell us? Well, you see, actually the way it reads, immediately after the distress of those days, means that everything that happens from that point on until Jesus comes again is a continuing flow of what he was talking about. Okay? So the sign of the end of times being in the works was the fall of Jerusalem. And everything from there on is just a continuation. So we talk about things getting bad and worse and things like that. It fits into when Jesus says it's going to be bad. And it continues to go downhill. You would think that what Jesus is saying, well, immediately after Jerusalem falls, I'm going to return. But if that was true, then Jesus would have had to have snuck in. And he says, when I come back, nobody's going to miss it. That's the idea behind as lightning can be seen from the east to the west. Jesus' return isn't going to be something that's secret. It is going to be something that absolutely everyone sees and experiences. But yet we've had so many people over the centuries who have been sign seekers, so much so that even back in 1914 there was one group that sold everything that they owned, and they went and set out on a hillside and waited for Jesus to return. Oh, He's coming. It's time. He's coming. Let's go watch for Him. And so they went out and sat on the hillside. He never returned. So they said, well, He's coming a little bit later. So the next time they did it, went out and sat on the hillside after selling everything, and Jesus never returned. Well, their answer was, well, He snuck in and nobody noticed. After Jesus Himself said, when I return, you're not going to miss it. Even in Revelation, it talks about Jesus coming as a triumphant warrior. It's not something that's going to be missed. And so He gives no details concerning the events that occur between the fall of Jerusalem and the end. Instead, He says this, as we pick up in Matthew 24, verse 36. But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. There is no sign of the end being close given. Even when you look in Revelation, you go through and people talk about the trumpet, you see it talks about the trumpets and all these things, but you notice at no point in Revelation does it ever say that people on earth can hear the trumpet. Never says it. We're not being given signs of the end of time. And as far as Christ's return, the angels don't know when it will be. Jesus doesn't even know when it will be. If you would, only the Father knows. He's the only one who knows when the end is going to be. Even in Revelation, when we see the Son waiting for the Father to give the word. And nothing happens until the Father sends word to the Son, okay, now you can go. And when the end comes, it will be unexpected. It will come suddenly and quickly, and people will not be ready for it. In other words, the signs mean nothing that people are looking at now. Because if they did mean something, well, His return would not be unexpected, would it? But the Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Thessalonians, if you would, how now, brothers, about times and dates we do not need to write to you, for you know very well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly as labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you, brothers, are not in darkness, so that this day should surprise you like a thief. Even Peter in his second epistle writes, if you would, but the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar, the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything done in it will be laid bare. Nobody's going to miss that. When Jesus returns, there is going to be an upheaval throughout the entire universe. And it's going to happen when nobody expects it. Because the signs don't mean look for the end. So what was Jesus and Paul and Peter trying to tell us? Quite simply, if you would, don't be looking for signs signaling the end. Don't look for them, because they're not going to be there. The things that we read in Revelations, it says that John saw them happen in heaven, not on earth. Now there are things that happened on earth in response, but the things that took place to indicate those things were part of this plan, we don't hear those things. We don't hear the trumpet sounding. That was heard only in heaven. So why is that important for us to understand that there's not any signs for us to be looking for? Well, when people get caught up in looking for signs, they stop doing what they should be doing, and many times start getting involved in the satanic. For instance, going into the astrology and the horoscopes and numerology and checking mediums, wanting signs of the future. And sadly, I see more and more believers getting into that stuff. And it's sad because it is forbidden by God. It's pulling them away from God. Hunting for signs. Wanting to know the future. This applies to wanting to know anything about the future. We're not supposed to be using our time on this earth trying to know the future and trying to fit every little thing out of the ordinary or even big events into the Bible in an effort to try and determine if the end is close. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. That's not what we are called to do. But people are trying to even fit this virus into the Bible as judgment from God, signaling the end is near. People have been doing this for centuries. The truth is, if you would, there have been more plagues in the past that better fit into the Bible narratives than this virus, so don't be trying to make it fit in as a sign. There's been worse stuff happen than what's going on now. Is it a judgment from God? People are trying to say, well, it's a judgment for God. Well, yes, in the sense that all disease are a result of sin entering the world. And so if you look at it from that standpoint, if you would, disease is one of God's judgments on sin. So yeah, disease is the judgment of God, which basically means everything that we suffer from is a judgment from God on sin. It's the consequences of sin in the world. That is what took place when God cursed the earth. He allowed sin, the consequences of sin, to become a growing process. And so we see more and more disease that becomes more and more deadly. It's a consequence. It's a judgment on sin. The more man sins, the more disease increases. So yes, if you would, all plagues and diseases and sicknesses are a judgment from God. Period. And this one's not a special judgment beyond anything else. The Black Plague wiped out more people than this virus seems to ever be going to come close to. Matter of fact, the Black Plague probably better fits what you see in Revelation than what's going on now, because it literally did wipe out almost a third of the population of the earth. So does this one mean the end is about to happen? No. Could the end happen? Yeah. But not because this pandemic is signaling the end. Simply because, and to look at this pandemic as a sign of the end is misguided. But yeah, the end could come unexpectedly. We don't know when it's going to be. It could come before we get out these doors this morning. Not because this pandemic is signaling it, but simply because it will come unexpected, when nobody's ready for it. But isn't that really what looking for signs is all about? Trying to get ready for something? The truth is, if you would, we need to be focused on living in the present for Christ. We need to look at each day as though it could be the last, like we've been told, regardless of what is going on in the world. Because the end will come like a thief in the night. And it will be completely unexpected. See, one of the things that brought about the exile of Judah is they were obsessed with signs and were turning to astrology and numerology and mediums and worshiping the Queen of Heaven and all of the other satanic things that God had forbidden instead of turning to Him. And today we see God's people more and more starting to turn to those things. People who claim to be believers check their horoscope faithfully every day. Into the astrology, into the numbers, consult with mediums. And those are the things that led to Judah being sent into exile. See, God doesn't want us looking for signs and getting ourselves pulled away from what we're supposed to be doing. That's why He's not giving us signs. You see, if you would, we are to be living godly lives and trying to bring others to Christ. And it's kind of hard to do that when you're focusing on end times and worrying about all the signs going on, and you're focused on that instead of reaching out into the community trying to win people to Christ. And when the end does come, if you would, those who are focused on doing what they are supposed to be doing won't have anything to worry about. I'm convinced that people looking for signs are worried about the end times because they know they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if we can get a good idea when the end is going to be, well, we might be able to just get our lives in order just in time. Whereas those who are already doing what they're supposed to be doing, we don't have anything to worry about. When it comes, it comes. We'll be with the Lord. Let me ask you this, if you would. Are you getting caught up in world events and trying to fit things into end times prophecy? Or are you focused on living a godly life and leading others to Christ? That's what we're called to do. We're not called to chase after signs. Yeah, we're called to have wisdom about things going on in the world. But as far as looking for signs and trying to predict the end, that's not what we're put here for. We are put here for the purpose of worshiping God and bringing others to Christ. And as long as we are doing what we are supposed to be doing, it doesn't matter when the end comes. For those doing what they're supposed to be doing, it's going to be okay. As a matter of fact, it's going to be better than okay. It's going to be beyond imagination. So what are you doing with the events going on today? Are you caught up in them? Worried about end times? Or do you see them as a great opportunity to bring others to Christ? Because it is. Because people are afraid. People are scared to death. What better time to give people hope? By bringing them to Christ. God is in control. Jesus has been made Lord over everything. He is the King. And as long as we know that our Father is in control and Jesus is the King, and we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, we've got nothing to worry about. As a matter of fact, we might even find ourselves like the Apostle John. Even so, Lord, come quickly. Don't make us keep waiting. Come and put an end to all of this. So what is your focus today? Are you worried and focused on the end? Or are you focused on living in the present for Christ and bringing others to the foot of the cross? Do you have a decision you need to make today? Maybe you need to change your focus and get things realigned with the biblical perspective and start living in the present instead of worrying about the future. Whatever your decision may be, would you make that decision